The request came in on a Tuesday. I know that because I was sitting in the auxiliary staff room on deck 7 of the Mending Constant, eating cold rice from a container I'd reheated twice and given up on, watching the rain sheet sideways against the porthole. We were still in Earth orbit, the ship still technically in auxiliary reserve status, which meant we were technically not deployed, and therefore I was technically not on duty. Which meant I was eating cold rice instead of the hot version that the galley would have produced if I'd bothered to walk the 40 meters to request it. That was the level of initiative being demanded of me at 1400 hours on a Tuesday in February. The ping came through on the auxiliary medical relay, which I shouldn't have been monitoring. I was monitoring it because my bunk was 2 meters from the relay terminal and boredom is a powerful motivator, and also because I had served 3 rotations on the auxiliary, and I had learned that the quiet moments on the auxiliary relay were the moments worth watching. The loud ones were someone else's problem. The quiet ones were usually yours. This one was quiet. It came in formatted in soth'vaari bureaucratic standard. I recognized the header because we'd trained on it. A dense hexagonal block of administrative identifiers followed by a tightly compressed request body. I'd processed maybe 40 of those headers in simulations. I'd never seen one arrive on a live relay channel. I put down the rice. The request body, once I ran it through the translation stack, was precise to the point of being almost insulting in its brevity. The soth'vaari administrative station, Velsoth Haram 7, orbital platform above the third body of the soth'vaari home cluster, required 1 licensed biomedical technician, Class 2 or above, cleared for off-world deployment, for a period not to exceed 30 standard days, to assess and treat a caseload of approximately 112 registered patients presenting with respiratory and circulatory complications secondary to a localized atmospheric processing failure on the station's lower residential decks. All paperwork was attached. All necessary clearances had been filed in advance with the conclave medical registry. A liability waiver had been pre-signed. The request was rate-coded Priority 3, which in conclave medical triage terminology meant non-critical, manageable, processable within standard review periods. There was also a note at the bottom. In the soth'vaari administrative standard, notes at the bottom of formal requests carry a specific marker, a small hexagonal glyph that flags the text as supplementary rather than binding. You didn't have to read it. It wasn't part of the official request. The translation stack rendered it in a slightly smaller font. I read it. The note said, the atmospheric processing failure had been active for 11 days. The 112 registered patients had been registered 6 days ago. The note said that the station's own medical systems had been managing the caseload with standard pharmacological intervention, but that 2 of the automated dispensary nodes had developed calibration faults and were currently offline for maintenance. The note also said, in the precise, airless language of soth'vaari administrative notation, which does not use emotional qualifiers, that the station had initially attempted to request assistance through the standard conclave medical relay 12 days ago, and that the request had been logged, assigned a review number, and placed in queue. The queue position was listed. I converted it to approximate wait time using the conclave's own publicly posted processing averages. 41 days. They had been waiting for a response for 12 days and were 41 days from the front of the queue. They had 112 patients, 2 pharmacological dispensary nodes offline, and they had filed the paperwork 12 days ago and received a queue number. So they had filed again, through a secondary relay, to the Earth Auxiliary Medical Network, which was, by conclave standards, an irregular channel. We were not first responders, not a conclave-certified provider, not on the approved list of medical resources that a conclave member station was supposed to be contacting. We were the Earth Auxiliary. We were the pile of second-hand equipment and volunteer staff that Earth kept around because Earth had not yet learned to stop keeping things around on the theory that they might be useful someday. I forwarded the request to Commander Adiz Akafar at 14:17 hours. I included the bottom note. I included the Q position. I included my rough calculation of the wait time. Then I sat back down in front of my cold rice and waited. The response from Commander Akafar came at 14:31 hours. It contained 3 words. Get your kit. I am not going to pretend that I fully understood in those early hours what was coming. I understood that Commander Akafar had cleared the deployment. I understood that the mending constant was being shifted from reserve status to active auxiliary, which required about 9 minutes of paperwork, because Commander Akafar had apparently kept the paperwork pre-filled for exactly this kind of moment. I understood that I was going, and that I was going as a Class 3 biomedical officer, which was 1 class above what the soth'vaari had requested, and that this felt like a small, private satisfaction. What I did not understand was what was already happening at other desks in other offices while I was packing my kit. I learned about that later. I learned about it in pieces, the way you always learn about the things that happen above your pay grade while you are busy doing the actual work. Here is what I learned, reconstructed in order. Commander Akafar had forwarded the request, with annotations, to the Earth Auxiliary Medical Coordination Office at 14:19 hours, 2 minutes after I had sent it to her. She had not simply flagged it for routing. She had annotated it with a specific observation, that the request reflected a pattern she had documented across 14 previous conclave medical requests in the prior fiscal year, in which member stations had filed through proper channels, received Q numbers, and then arrived on the secondary Earth relay weeks or months later, at which point the situation on the ground had materially worsened. She had a spreadsheet. She had been keeping the spreadsheet for 14 months. The coordination office had read the annotation. Someone there, I do not know who, I have never been able to find out who, had done something that was not strictly within the scope of normal auxiliary operations. They had escalated the request not to the standard deployment scheduler, but to the Earth Relief Directorate, which was a different office entirely, and which operated under a different set of authorizations. The Relief Directorate had read the request at 15:23 hours. By 1600 hours, the Mending Constant's deployment orders had been countersigned by 3 offices I had never heard of, and 2 ships I had never seen before had been added to what was now, apparently, a convoy. I found this out when I arrived at the docking bay with my kit at 16:48 hours, and found Lieutenant Dara Mensa standing next to a manifest that was considerably longer than any manifest I had ever seen for an auxiliary deployment. "What is all of this?" I said. Mensa looked at the manifest. He looked at me. He had the expression of someone who has been holding a series of increasingly surprising pieces of information for the past 2 hours and has not yet processed all of them. "The short version," he said, "is that we have company." The Reliant Grace was a dedicated surgical ship. She carried 12 surgeons, 31 surgical nurses and theater technicians, 4 anesthesiologists, and enough consumable theater supply to run sustained high-volume operations for approximately 90 days. She was not a small ship. She was not a quiet ship. I could hear the sound of equipment being loaded from 2 docking bays over, a low continuous percussion of crates and gurneys, and the particular metallic ring of surgical-grade stainless steel instrument sets being packed into transit containers. The Olorin Depot, and I had to look this name up because I had never heard of it, was what the manifest described as a bulk medical and humanitarian logistics platform. It was, in practice, a flying warehouse. It was not designed to be elegant. It was designed to hold things. Based on the transit weight listed on the manifest, it was currently holding a very great many things. I asked Mensa what was on it. He handed me a sub-manifest. It was 14 pages. I read the first 3 pages, then I read them again, then I handed them back. Mensa nodded slowly, with the air of someone who had already done this exact sequence of actions himself. 14 pages, he said. 14 pages, I confirmed. There was pharmacological stock, not just respiratory and circulatory medication, but a broad-spectrum supply that covered, by my rough estimate, approximately 6 times the caseload that the soth'vaari request had described. There were portable atmospheric processing units, 27 of them, each capable of cycling the air in a mid-sized residential deck continuously for 180 days. There were 2 complete replacement dispensary nodes, the kind that the soth'vaari station had listed as offline and undergoing maintenance. The manifest listed them as reconditioned, recently calibrated, certified for off-world installation. There were food stores. I had not expected food stores, approximately 11 tons of nutrient-standardized provisions compatible with soth'vaari biology, calculated to supplement a station population of approximately 2,000 for 60 days. There were water recycling components. There were portable power cells. There were quarantine partitions and decontamination equipment, and a quantity of trauma consumables that suggested someone had done a very thorough and rather grim set of projections about what might be waiting for us. And at the bottom of the manifest, listed under the heading Security Complement, in plain administrative language with no particular emphasis or drama, was a garrison. Not a large garrison. I want to be precise about this. It was not a battle group. It was 2 platoons of Earth Defense Auxiliary Infantry plus a medical security detail and 2 light combat vehicles. The manifest listed them as Standard Protective Accompaniment per Relief Directorate Protocol 7 Delta. I had never heard of Protocol 7 Delta. I looked it up later. It had been written in the aftermath of a relief mission 12 years prior in which an aid team had arrived at a compromised station and found that the situation on the ground had evolved in ways the original request had not described. Protocol 7 Delta said, in plain language, send enough people that the situation on the ground cannot prevent you from doing your job, whatever the situation turns out to be. So they sent enough people. The soth'vaari had not been told exactly what was coming. They had filed a request for 1 biomedical technician, Class 2 or above. They had received an automated acknowledgement from the Earth Auxiliary Medical Network within 4 hours of filing. The acknowledgement said, "Your request has been received and is under active review." That was all it said. This was, from the Earth side, a deliberately modest communication. Someone in the coordination office had made a decision, consciously or by default, I have never been able to determine which, not to pre-notify the receiving station of the convoy's composition. The reasoning, as Commander Akafor later explained it to me, was practical rather than theatrical. If you tell a soth'vaari administrative station that 3 ships and a garrison are inbound, you generate a great deal of administrative response traffic, clearance requests, capacity assessments, berth allocation queries, formal reception protocols, compliance reviews. All of that takes time and attention, and it takes that time and attention away from the people on the lower residential decks who were, at that moment, still breathing compromised air through still offline dispensary nodes. So no pre-notification of scale, just, your request is under active review. Inbound ETA to follow. The ETA we transmitted was accurate. We sent it when we hit the midpoint of transit. 1 ETA message, a standard docking request, and our ship identifications. 3 ship identifications, and a convoy formation indicator. I was on the Mending Constance Bridge when we came out of transit. I was there because Commander Akafor had asked me to be there, not for any operational reason, but because she thought it would be useful for me to see this. She was that kind of commander. She thought things were useful to see. She had been that kind of commander for 16 years, and it had made her team extremely competent and occasionally very uncomfortable. The soth'vaari home cluster came into view on the forward display, 3 bodies in a warm orange system, the third one carrying the station we were bound for. The station itself was orbital, a mid-sized ring platform with atmospheric domes and a docking spine that had been built, as most soth'vaari infrastructure was built, to precise specification and nothing beyond. It was functional, clean, well-maintained. It was also, I noticed on the sensors, currently lit for emergency cycle, the external indicator strips running the amber pattern that the soth'vaari used for ongoing environmental incident status. Amber, not red. They had not escalated to red. They had maintained amber. They had been in amber for 11 days. The comm channel opened. The station's docking controller spoke in soth'vaari administrative standard, translated in real time through my earpiece. Incoming vessels, please confirm ship identification and purpose of arrival. We have logged a medical aid request reference and are expecting 1 vessel, biomedical class. Commander Akafer leaned forward slightly in her seat. Station soth'vaari 7, this is Commander Adiz Akafer, Earth Auxiliary Medical Vessel Mending Constant. We are arriving in convoy formation with the surgical vessel Reliant Grace and the logistics platform Unbidden Depot. We are responding to your medical aid request, reference as logged. Please advise on optimal docking configuration for 3 vessels and request a copy of your current patient census. A pause, a longer pause than you would expect from a station that had been waiting for a response for 12 days. Then Commander Akafer, another pause, a briefer one, the administrative training reasserting itself. We have received your identification. We are please stand by while we assess berth availability for 3 vessels. Understood. We'll hold in formation. I watched the forward display. I watched the station's docking spine, where I could see, even at this distance, a cluster of movement figures at the external observation windows, or at least what I interpreted as figures. The soth'vaari are a dense-belted species, warm-toned, with a build that runs toward the compact and sturdy. From any real distance they were hard to resolve. But the windows were occupied in a way that the windows of a station expecting routine administrative contact would not normally be occupied. We held in formation for 9 minutes, then the docking controller came back. Commander Akafer, we have allocated berths for all 3 vessels. The mending constant is cleared for berth 7, primary medical dock. A slight pause, a careful reading. The Reliant Grace is allocated berth 12, extended surgical dock. The Unbidden Depot, another pause. I suspected the docking controller was looking at a berth capacity manifest and doing mathematics in real time. The Unbidden Depot is allocated berth 3, cargo and logistics primary. May we ask the purpose of the logistics platform's cargo? Medical supplies, Commander Akafer said. Full manifest will be transmitted on docking. A pause. Understood. Proceed on approach all vessels. soth'vaari met us at the mending Constance docking ramp. I know this because I was the first one down the ramp, carrying a medical field kit and a copy of the patient census that the station had transmitted during our approach, and he was standing at the bottom of it. I had read the briefing materials on the soth'vaari during transit. I knew the physical description, compact and sturdy, dense fur ranging from warm tawny to deep amber brown, wide-set eyes adapted for the lower light environments that their natural habitat had favored, a bone structure that ran heavier through the shoulder and chest than a human would expect. The administrator was in the dark-piped uniform of soth'vaari station management, which was practical and unornamented, and he was standing very straight in the way of a person who had decided, consciously, to be standing very straight, and whose effort in doing so was visible to someone paying attention. He was paying attention to me. He was paying attention to the ramp. He was paying attention to everything that was coming down it. Administrator Haram, I said. My translator rendered it in soth'vaari administrative standard, formal, appropriate register. I am Dr. Priya Vasanthan, Earth Auxiliary Medical Class 3. I'm your first contact for the medical response. He looked at me. He looked behind me at the ramp, where Lieutenant Mensa was coming down with 2 additional medics and a mobile diagnostic cart. He looked at the view through the docking window that showed the Reliant Grace at berth 12 and the Aloran depot at berth 3. The depot was, even at this angle, the largest object in the view that was not the station itself. Dr. Vasanthan, he said. His voice through the translator was precise and carefully controlled. We filed a request for 1 technician. You did, I said. We responded with what the situation required. He looked at me for a moment. There are expressions that do not require translation. His face, in that moment, had the quality of a person confronting a sum that does not resolve into a category they have previously encountered. It was not hostility. It was not gratitude yet. It was too early for gratitude, or perhaps it was too large for gratitude yet. The way a very bright light takes a moment before your eyes adjust, and you can actually see what it is. The manifest, he said. I have received the manifest from the logistics platform. He stopped. He began again. It is a very comprehensive manifest. 14 pages, I said. He absorbed this. We asked, he said, for 1 technician. I know. Our patient census is 112 individuals. I know. I've read it. I'd like to start there if you can take me to the residential decks, but I'd also like to flag, Administrator, that the census you transmitted during our approach listed 112 registered patients. Based on the timeline of the atmospheric fault and the dispensary outages you noted, I want to run a broader screening on the unregistered population before I close that number. Is that? Yes, he said, quickly, more quickly than the administrative register usually permitted. Then more carefully, that would be yes, that would be acceptable. Good, can you take me to the lower decks now? He took me to the lower decks. The lower residential decks of Velsoth Haram 7 were not a disaster. I want to be clear about this because disaster is the word that gets used in retrospect, and it is not quite accurate. They were not in the condition of a place that had surrendered. They were in the condition of a place that had been maintaining, carefully and efficiently, for longer than it should have been asked to maintain without help. There is a difference. I have seen disasters. The lower decks were not that. They were, however, very tired. The atmospheric fault had been a gradual thing, a slow degradation in 2 of the environmental processing nodes that fed the lower residential sections. Not a catastrophic failure, but a slow diminishment. The kind of thing that presents as a mild ache before it presents as a sharp pain. The soth'vaari station management systems had flagged it, had initiated maintenance cycles, had managed it with the automated pharmacological dispensary nodes that the station carried for exactly this kind of event. And the dispensary nodes had managed it, right up until 2 of them had developed calibration faults of their own, and then the management had become manual, and manual management of a distributed environmental and pharmaceutical system for a population of several hundred people is the kind of task that uses up every resource a station has without any of that use being visible from the outside. The station's medical staff, 4 people, had not slept properly in 6 days. The administrator's records were meticulous, but they had that quality of meticulousness that comes from people who are writing everything down very carefully because they are afraid that if they stop writing things down carefully, something will be missed. The census was 112. When I ran the broader screening, the number was 167. There was a reason for the gap that I understood by the end of the first hour on the lower decks, and it had nothing to do with negligence and everything to do with resource arithmetic. The station's 4 medical staff had divided their duties so precisely that the divisions had become walls. One of them was managing the pharmacological inventory, such as it was, with the 2 remaining dispensary nodes running at reduced capacity. One was running what ambulatory clinics she could in the station's small medical bay, seeing patients one at a time, triaging by severity, keeping the highest acuity cases in view. One was working overnight shifts, monitoring the atmospheric sensor network across 3 decks, tracking the numbers, logging the deviations, alerting maintenance when a reading crossed threshold. And the fourth, a young man named soth'vaari, the junior of the 4, who could not have been more than 3 or 4 years out of his training certification, had been doing everything that did not fit in the other 3 categories, which turned out to be a very large category indeed. Outreach, follow-up, patient transport, inventory counts, translation bridging when the station's automated systems weren't precise enough, and the writing of a daily status summary for Administrator Haram that was accurate and clear, and which had, I could tell from reading back through the accumulated copies, grown slightly shorter each day as soth'vaari's available hours had grown slightly thinner. He was on the deck when I arrived. He saw the diagnostic kit I was carrying, and he looked at it the way you look at something that you have been waiting for without permitting yourself to admit you were waiting for it. He was steady. He was professional. He had not, I later learned, slept more than 5 hours in any of the past 6 nights. He looked me over with the focused attention of someone who is calculating how much of the load in front of them they might be able to set down. Class 3, I said, showing him my credentials. Tell me where to start. He told me. He was very specific, and his information was very accurate, and in the first 30 minutes of working with him, I adjusted my estimate of the station's medical situation in 2 directions at once. It was worse than the census suggested in terms of unregistered cases, and it was better managed than it had any right to be given the resources available. Those 2 things were not in tension. They were the same fact from different angles. I sent the revised number to Commander Okafor at 1800 hours, station time. I did not need to add anything to it. She would understand what it meant. The Reliant Grace had already begun unloading surgical capability by the time I sent that message. The Aloran depot had begun unloading the replacement dispensary nodes before we'd even cleared docking protocols, because someone on the depot's logistics team had read the original request carefully and had pre-staged the nodes at the cargo ramp. 40 minutes after we docked, a 2-person installation team from the depot was already on the lower decks with the replacement units, walking behind the station's chief maintenance officer, who had not yet said anything but whose posture had changed in a way that I noticed without being able to fully describe. He was walking slightly differently, not faster, differently. The atmospheric processors were first. Not because I had ordered it, I had been busy with the census, but because the depot's logistics coordinator, a quiet woman named Sayoni Tuilagi, had read the manifest, read the census, and made a decision about sequence that was exactly correct. You fix the air first. Everything else runs on the air. Tuilagi had pre-calculated the number of processors needed for the lower decks, had staged them in sequence order, and had drafted a deployment schedule before we docked. By 2100 hours, 9 portable processors were running on the lower residential decks, cycling air that had been subtly wrong for 11 days into air that was measurably, instrumentally correct. I know the air changed because I watched the soth'vaari residents on the lower decks respond to it. The change in atmospheric composition was gradual. It had to be gradual. You do not switch compromised air to clean air instantly for a population that has been breathing the compromised version for 11 days. But there is a moment, maybe 2 hours into the cycle, where the instruments show that the composition has crossed the threshold, and you can see it in the people around you even before you look at the instruments. They breathe slightly differently. Their shoulders do something. It is not dramatic. It is very quiet, but it is real, And once you have seen it, you cannot miss it. And I have seen it enough times in enough places that it still does something to me that I cannot quite qualify scientifically. Administrator Haram found me on the lower deck at 2200 hours. I was doing follow-up checks on the census population, moving through the residential sections with a diagnostic scanner and a soth'vaari language patient intake form that one of the Reliant Grace's nurses had pre-translated and printed before we docked. He fell into step beside me without asking whether I had time. I appreciated that. He had read the room correctly. I was busy, and I would talk while busy, and asking if I had time would have taken more time than simply walking beside me. The dispensary nodes are calibrated, he said. The installation team, your installation team, completed calibration at 2147. I know, I got the confirmation. Your atmospheric team they have been on the lower deck since 1840. They have not taken a meal break. They'll take one. Tuilagi runs a tight schedule. She just front-loads the critical work. He was quiet for a moment. We walked past a residential unit where a family, 2 adults, 3 juveniles had left the door open, and through the open door I could see one of the juveniles sitting close to a portable atmospheric processor with their face turned toward the circulation grill, just sitting there in the warm current of clean air with their eyes closed. It was not a distressed posture. It was the opposite of a distressed posture. It was the posture of someone who has been given something back that they did not realize they were missing until the moment of its return. Administrator Haram saw it too. He did not comment. We walked on. The surgical team, he said. They have set up in our secondary medical bay. They brought their own, they brought everything. They asked my medical staff to observe the first 3 procedures. Yes, standing protocol. If our team treats your population, your team learns the methodology. That way, when we leave, you have capacity you didn't have before. He processed this. That was not in the request parameters. No, it's not standard in the request parameters. It's what we do. Another silence. Dr. Vasanthan, when we filed the request, the original request, through the conclave relay. 41 days in queue, I said. 41 days, he confirmed. He stopped. He was, I sensed, choosing words very carefully. The soth'vaari administrative register does not favor imprecision, which means that when something falls outside the categories that precision has prepared for, the speaker tends to pause. We were managing, he said finally. We were managing adequately. I know, your records are excellent. We did not file with your network because we believed the situation was catastrophic. We filed because the queue timeline. Because 41 days was too long. Yes, too long. We filed as a secondary option. We expected, he paused again. We expected 1 technician. The request specified 1 technician. The paperwork was filed for 1 technician. I stopped walking and looked at him. His face was doing the thing again. The thing that had no direct administrative category, that the precise and well-maintained language of his professional register had not been built to express. It was not ingratitude. It was not confusion exactly. It was the expression of a person standing inside a response that did not fit the shape they had expected a response to have, and finding that the misfit was not uncomfortable but was, instead, very large, and that the largeness of it was something that was going to take some time to become familiar with. We sent what the situation required, I said, not what the paperwork requested. The paperwork gives us the minimum. The situation gives us the actual number. We try to respond to the actual number. He looked at me for a long time. The corridor hum continued, the processor and the distant sound of Reliant Grace's equipment somewhere above us, and the faint voice of a depot technician checking atmospheric readings through a communicator down the hall. The station around us was alive with activity that had not existed 12 hours ago, and I could see him registering it. Not the individual pieces, which he had been registering all day, but the aggregate of it, the total weight of it, the way that the sum of all the movement and all the equipment and all the personnel added up to something that had no equivalent in his previous experience of how responses to requests worked. I thought about the conclave queue, 41 days. I thought about what day 41 would have looked like on these decks, with Setholer's daily summaries getting shorter and shorter, with Rel Voss managing triage alone, while the other three ran the sensor network and the pharmacy and the clinic, with the census creeping from 112 toward whatever the actual number was. I did not say any of this because it was not productive, and because Haram was an intelligent administrator who had done exactly that same arithmetic himself in the 12 days since the original request had gone in. He did not need me to say it. He needed me to keep working, which was what I intended to do. "Your people," he said, "your garrison, they are stationed at the main corridor junctions." They asked my security chief which positions were understaffed, and they simply took those positions. My security chief did not ask them to do this. They looked at the layout and they. "Protocol 7 Delta," I said. "If we're here and we have the personnel, we don't stand around watching. We fill the gaps we see. Your security chief can reassign them any time they're there at his discretion." "He has not reassigned them," Haram said. "He came to find me at 1900 hours to tell me that they were there, and I asked him if he wanted me to raise it with your convoy command, and he looked at me for a moment and then he said no. He said no, and then he went back to his station." We stood in the corridor for a moment. Somewhere further down the deck I could hear voices, soth'vaari and human, the translation software bridging the gap in that particular flat mechanical register that somehow, over time, you stop hearing and start hearing through, so that what you're actually receiving is not the translation but the conversation beneath it. "This is what you do," Haram said. It was not quite a question. "This is what we do," I said. He was quiet for another moment. Then, "There are 11 residents on the lower decks who have not presented for the screening. I have their names. My staff have been unable to persuade them to participate." "I'll go to them," I said. "They may not admit you." "Then I'll leave a card and come back tomorrow." He looked at me. Then he looked at the door we were standing near, from behind which I could hear the faint sound of an atmospheric processor cycling. Then he looked back at me. "The garrison," he said. "2 platoons, the manifest said, 2 full platoons." "Yes." "We asked for 1 technician." "You needed 2 platoons worth of security gap filling and force projection to keep the situation from evolving in ways the original request didn't describe," I said. "We sent what you needed, not what you asked for." He was very still for a moment. "Force projection," he repeated very quietly. "Calm," I said. "Professional standing at corridor junctions, not firing at anything." "No," he said. "No, they are not. They are very calm." That's the idea. The story of the next 8 days is, in its operational dimensions, unremarkable. I say this not to diminish what was done, but because what was done was exactly what competent people do when given the right tools and enough time and a clear objective. The surgical team from the Reliant Grace completed 43 procedures over those 8 days, 11 of which were more complex than the initial census had suggested. The census had been accurate as far as it went, but the broader screening had found cases that the station's own 4-person medical staff, managing everything else at the same time, had not had the bandwidth to escalate to surgical priority. All 43 were successful. I will not use another word for that outcome, because no other word is needed. The atmospheric processing units stabilized the lower decks within 36 hours of deployment. The replacement dispensary nodes went online calibrated and clean, and Tuilaga's logistics team installed an additional backup unit that had not been on the original manifest. It had been added at the last moment by someone in the coordination office who had read the description of the dispensary fault, and decided that 2 replacement units was the right answer, but 3 was the better one. Haram's maintenance chief found the 3rd unit in the depot's cargo manifest at 600 on the 3rd day, and came to find me to ask about it. I told him to keep it. He looked at the unit for a moment, then he looked at me. "It is not in the original request parameters," he said. "No," I said, "consider it a contingency." He did not say anything further. He had his staff install it, and he logged it in the station's inventory records under the heading Contingency Asset, Earth Relief Origin. His record-keeping was, as I had already noted, excellent. The medical training transfer ran across all 8 days. The 4 members of the station's medical staff attended every procedure, every clinical briefing, every pharmacological review. By day 4, 2 of them were functioning as active assistants rather than observers. By day 7, one of them, a soth'vaari medical technician named Rel Voss, young, methodical, with the particular quality of attention that distinguishes someone who is not just learning but cataloging, had asked the Reliant Grace's lead surgeon if she could shadow him through the full preoperative assessment process. He had said yes, and she had, and on day 8 she had conducted the preoperative assessment for the final 2 procedures herself, with him standing to one side and making no corrections. I logged that in my operational notes. I log things like that because they are the things that matter and that tend not to appear in the official after-action summaries, which favor the quantifiable. 43 procedures, quantifiable. 1 young soth'vaari technician who can now run a preoperative assessment, not in the box on the form, but real. The Garrison. I should say more about the Garrison. 2 platoons, calm and professional, at corridor junctions and access points and the external docking approaches. They ate their own provisions. They did not impose on the station's resources. On day 3, a senior corporal named Soth'vaari noticed that the station's food distribution system, which served the residential decks through a network of automated dispensary units, a completely separate system from the pharmacological network, had a faulty routing module that was causing irregular delivery intervals on 2 residential deck segments. He was not asked to look at it. He was not a logistics technician. He had, apparently, spent 6 years before his military service working in automated distribution system maintenance for an agricultural cooperative in northern Kenya, and the routing module had caught his eye while he was standing at his corridor post. He asked Haram's permission. Haram said yes. Ibarra spent 4 hours on his off-rotation shift diagnosing and correcting the routing fault with his corporal's toolkit and a translation interface he borrowed from the station's maintenance log terminal. The food distribution normalized on day 4. Haram's staff logged it. They did not know how to categorize it in their records. They put it under infrastructure maintenance, Earth Auxiliary Security Complement, volunteer basis. I found out about it on day 5, when I happened to walk past the junction where Ibarra was posted and asked him, in passing, how things were going. "Quiet," he said. "Fix the food routing on 3-7. "I heard," I said. "Your commanding officer knows." "Told her on day 3. She said if it didn't compromise my post duties, go ahead." "Did it?" "No, ma'am. Did it on my off-rotation." I looked at him for a moment. He was a big man, calm, with the composed attentiveness of someone who had learned to watch without appearing to watch. He was watching the corridor approach with the professional ease of someone who was both completely at rest and completely prepared, which is a thing that takes considerable training to arrive at. "Good work, Corporal," I said. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "Thought it was worth fixing." On the morning of day 9, Commander Akafer called all convoy senior staff to a briefing and confirmed what we had already deduced from our operational timelines. The primary caseload was resolved, the station systems were stable, the training transfer was complete, and we were 48 hours from completing our formal deployment and departing. Administrator Haram attended the briefing. He had attended every morning briefing. I had noticed this on day 2 and said nothing about it, because there was nothing to say. It was his station. He was entitled to attend, and his presence at the briefings had been, in practical terms, useful. He knew his station better than we did, and he had consistently provided context that improved our operational picture. He sat through the day 9 briefing with the stillness of someone who had been sitting through briefings for 8 days and had developed a very accurate internal model of how they ran. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both pertinent. He noted that the Reliant Grace's surgical census was complete. He noted that the atmospheric readings on the lower decks had been within normal parameters for 6 days. At the end of the briefing, Commander Okafor asked if there were any additional items. Administrator Haram said, "I would like to speak if there is time." Commander Okafor said there was time. He spoke in soth'vaari administrative standard, and the translation ran in real time through the room speaker system. He spoke, as the soth'vaari administrative standard requires, with precision. He did not ornament what he said. He did not use the kinds of constructions that human emotional registers reach for in moments like this. He did not say that he was moved, or that he was grateful beyond his capacity to express. The soth'vaari administrative standard does not have a construction for beyond my capacity to express. It has constructions for what is measurable and what is not yet measured, and in the space between those 2 categories, it tends toward silence rather than approximation. What he said was this. He said that when he had filed the original request through the conclave relay, he had received a queue number and had calculated that the response time would exceed the manageable window for the station's current caseload. He said that he had then filed through the secondary relay, the Earth Auxiliary Network, as an alternative option, expecting. He used this word with the precision it deserved, expecting a response commensurate with the request as filed. 1 technician, 60 days. Standard parameters. He said that what had arrived was not commensurate with the request as filed. He said that in his 22 years of station administration, he had managed 14 medical resource requests through conclave channels. He described the average response time, the average resource allocation, the average delta between the situation as it existed and the resources as they arrived. He gave these numbers precisely because he had them written down, because he wrote everything down. The numbers were not good numbers. They were the numbers of a system that processed things correctly and responded to the minimum of what was asked and moved on to the next item in queue. He said that the station had been in amber status for 11 days when we arrived. He said that the station had managed adequately for those 11 days. He said that the word adequately had a technical meaning in administrative usage that he wanted to name explicitly, because he believed its technical meaning was hiding something, and he thought it was important to name the thing it was hiding. The thing it was hiding, he said, was that adequately meant the situation had not yet become a disaster, not the situation was fine. He paused. He looked at the briefing room, at Commander Okafor, at me, at Tuilagi, at the Reliant Grace's lead surgeon, at Lieutenant Mensah, at the Garrison's company commander. He said, "You did not respond to the disaster that had not yet happened. You responded to the disaster that was going to happen. You looked at what we filed, and you read what we did not file, and you sent what that required." He said that he did not have a category in his administrative framework for this. He had spent the past 8 days looking for one and had not found it. He said, "I wanted to say that. I wanted to say it precisely, in front of all of you, so that it was logged, so that there was a record of it." The room was quiet for a moment. Commander Okafor said, "Noted, and thank you, Administrator." And then we went back to work for the last 48 hours, because there was still work to do. We departed on the morning of day 11. The Aloran depot went first. She was the slowest in transit and needed the head start. The Reliant Grace followed at 900. The mending constant made her final systems check, completed the formal departure protocols with the station's docking control, and began her separation sequence at 1100. I was at my station on Deck 7 when we departed. I was writing my operational log, the one that the Relief Directorate requires, the one with all the quantifiable numbers, the census figures and the procedure counts, and the days of atmospheric processor operation and the pharmacological units dispensed. It is a form with boxes, and I was filling in the boxes, and I was doing it carefully because I am, in this regard, something like Administrator Haram. I believe in writing things down correctly. But before the form, I had written something else. I write this in every operational log, in the section before the boxes, which is labeled simply Notes, and has no character limit and no formatting requirement, and which most of my colleagues use for brief operational observations. I used it for this. I wrote, the patient census arrived as 112, actual treated population 167, Delta 55. Those 55 individuals were present on the station when the request was filed. They were present in the conclave queue system as part of a population under an active medical resource request. They were not in the census because the station's medical staff, managing everything else, had not yet reached them. They would have been in the census. Eventually. When the queue resolved in 41 days, they would have been counted, and a response would have been calibrated to their numbers, and the response would have arrived, and it would have been commensurate with what was filed. I wrote, we do not respond to what is filed, we respond to what is there. I wrote, this is the thing that I cannot put in the boxes on the form, because the boxes on the form are for what happened. This is about why it happened the way it did, and that is a different kind of record. I wrote, Administrator Haram said that he had been managing adequately. I believe him. I believe that the word is technically accurate. I also believe that 11 days of adequate management by 4 exhausted medical staff for 167 people breathing subtly wrong air would have become something else on day 15 or day 20 or day 31. I cannot prove this. It is not in the boxes. But I have done this work long enough to know what the trajectory looks like from inside it, and I know where that particular trajectory goes. I wrote, we filed a departure manifest this morning. The station has 2 replacement dispensary nodes, calibrated and running. It has 1 contingency dispensary node, logged under contingency asset. It has 27 portable atmospheric processors, of which 9 remain deployed on the lower decks as backup. It has 11 tons of nutritional provision. It has a medical staff that includes 1 technician who can now conduct a preoperative assessment without supervision. It has a food routing system that works correctly on deck segment 37. It has a security protocol that the Garrison's corporal drafted during his off-rotation on day 6 and left with the station's security chief as a standing recommendation, which the security chief filed under operational reference, Earth Auxiliary Security Complement. I wrote, we departed with a manifest delta that I will try to describe precisely. The station's pre-arrival inventory of working medical dispensary units was 2. Its post-departure inventory was 5, 2 replacements, 1 contingency, and 2 of its own original units that had been recalibrated by the depot's installation team as a matter of course while they were on deck. No one had requested the recalibration of the originals. The installation team had done it because they were there and the units were in front of them, and the recalibration took 40 minutes, and it was the obvious thing to do when you have the tools and the access and the time. That is the kind of decision that does not appear in any protocol document I have ever read. It appears in the character of the people you send. I wrote, Soth'vaari, the junior member of the station's medical staff, slept 9 hours on the first night after we arrived. I know this because I asked, on day 2, and he told me without any particular self-consciousness, the way you tell a fact that is just a fact. He slept 9 hours. He ate a full meal from the station galley without interrupting it twice to check a sensor. He came to the day 2 briefing with the particular quality of presence that a person has when they have, briefly, had enough of something they had been going without. He was sharper in the briefing than he had been in our first conversation. He asked better questions. 3 months from now, or 6 months, or a year, he will not remember those 9 hours as anything remarkable. But I will. I wrote, "This is the part that does not go in the boxes." I stopped writing. I looked out the porthole. The station was visible from this angle, the amber status indicator strip still running. They had not cleared the amber until the dispensary nodes came back online, which was operationally correct, and the amber had cleared on day 4, and the external indicator strips had shifted to standard green, and I had noticed it from the docking window and had said nothing because what was there to say? The amber was gone. The indicators were green. The work was done. Now the station was receding behind us, and the indicator strips were too far to resolve, and it was just a structure in an orange system, tidy and well-maintained, carrying its population in clean air with working dispensaries, and a young technician who knew how to run a preoperative assessment. I went back to the form. I filled in the boxes. I filled in all of them correctly in the right order. 8 months later, the Earth Relief Directorate received a communication from the Conclave Humanitarian Affairs Committee. The committee had conducted a review of relief response records across their member systems for the prior fiscal year. The review had been triggered, the communication noted, by an anomalous data point. A member station had logged a medical resource response from a non-conclave provider, Earth's Auxiliary Medical Network, that had exceeded the requested parameters by a factor the committee's analysis software had flagged as an outlier requiring manual review. The manual review had produced a report. The report was 43 pages. I have read all 43 pages. The report noted, in its summary section, that the Earth Auxiliary response to the Velsoth-Haram 7 medical request had resulted in outcomes that exceeded the projected resolution metrics for the case by a statistically significant margin across 8 of the 9 metrics the committee tracked. It noted that the response had included resources not specified in the original request, including surgical capacity, logistics infrastructure, and a security complement, all of which had contributed to the positive outcome delta. It noted that the training transfer component, which the report characterized as non-standard, non-requested, and outside conclave medical aid protocol parameters, had resulted in a measurable improvement in station resident medical capacity that was projected to persist for a minimum of 4 years following the Earth Auxiliary departure. The report then noted, in its recommendations section, that the committee was recommending a formal review of conclave medical aid response protocols, with particular reference to the gap between requested parameters and actual situational requirements, and with reference to the Earth Auxiliary response model as a case study in excessive request delivery and its outcomes. The report also noted, and this was in a footnote, which in conclave documentation carries approximately the same weight as Administrator Haram's administrative supplementary note, meaning it is technically non-binding and optional reading, meaning it is the thing the author wanted to say but did not quite have a box for, that the committee had been unable to identify in the prior 12 years of conclave medical response records. A case in which a responding entity had deployed resources at this ratio to the requested parameters and achieved a correspondingly positive outcome. The footnote said, "The committee is aware that this may reflect a gap in the current data set rather than a true absence of comparable cases." The footnote then said, "The committee is also aware that it may not." Commander Okafor showed me the report in the staff room on Deck 7. She had printed it. She has a habit of printing important things, because she believes that paper is harder to lose than a screen, which is not technically true but is true in a practical sense that I have come to appreciate. She set it on the table next to my rice, which was, on this particular Tuesday, actually hot, because I had gone to the galley to get it. 43 pages, she said. I read them, I said. Footnote, she said. I read that too. She sat down across from me. She had her own rice. She had also been to the galley, which was one of the things I had always appreciated about her. She ate the same food in the same place as the rest of the team, which was not a complicated thing, but which was, in my experience, not universal. They're going to change the protocols, she said. The conclave, the committee's recommendation carries weight. I know. It'll take a few years. It usually does. We ate for a moment. Outside the porthole, Earth was visible, the curve of it, the blue, the slow white rotation of cloud systems over the Southern Ocean. We were back in reserve status. There was cold rice in my future, and quiet relay channels, and a bunk 2 meters from a terminal that I would keep monitoring because that was what I did. Haram sent a note, Akefir said. I heard. You read it. Relvas passed her certification, I said. Full medical technician, primary track. Haram sent us the notification. He didn't have to do that. No, Akefir said, he didn't. We sat with that for a moment. They asked for one technician, she said, not with any particular emphasis, just noting it. They asked for one technician, I said. Outside, the Earth turned, slow and blue and enormously itself, and the relay terminal on the wall blinked its steady indicator light. And in the silence of the staff room on Deck 7, the rice was hot, and the air was clean, and somewhere in the soth'vaari home cluster, a young medical technician named Relvas was running a preoperative assessment on her own, and the amber had been green for 8 months. And somewhere in a conclave committee office, someone was drafting protocol revisions that would take a few years, but that would come. We do not respond to what is filed. We respond to what is there.